So we're still in this this series, this flood prevention series. We're going to pick up right where we left off from last week. I'm not just going to cancel that sermon and move on. We're going to just take that one and do it this week instead and keep going through. The title flood prevention is kind of a double entendre, if you will. It's like flood prevention, like we're trying to stop the flood from happening in a way. It's much less that, though, because God promised never to flood the earth again. It's got a lot more to do with what the flood itself actually prevented and the flood strategy as a prevention method. And we kind of unveiled that last week and talked a little bit about what that might mean. Spent a lot of time talking about kind of the chapters 1 through 5 portion of Genesis leading up to the flood and how things got to be the way that they were. Talked a little bit about what it meant for God to limit the lifespans of people, about how humans were creatively and inventively just coming up with new ways to do evil to each other and to the earth and to their cities and to everything that they could think of to do that was wrong they were doing. And so God limits their lifespans to 120 years so that they have a lot less time to come up with ways of doing evil. It makes good sense. It's a good strategy. And it's kind of poetic the way that God words it. He says something to the effect of, I grow weary of humans. I will only let their years be 120 years. I got to imagine that it would be frustrating to watch someone make the same mistakes over and over again for 900 years and watch them actually get better at it over time instead of getting better at not doing it. So that restriction makes a lot of sense to me. We talked about how we can learn from these strategies that we're going to be going over, this flood prevention strategies, and superimpose them on our own lives and use them as strategies to try and reduce our own habits, reduce our own sin habits and problems that we struggle with routinely, and also not so routinely, but that we can create systems that mirror the strategies God used in order to prevent these kinds of things from happening in our own lives. So the strategy from last week, the 120-year limit, we superimposed that on our lives and said, let's be careful to limit our time around things that cause us problems. If we have problems with this area or whatever, we need to be careful about spending a lot of time in close proximity to those things, whatever that might mean. Close proximity to those people, close proximity to that thing, close proximity to that bar. Spending less time there will give us less opportunity to make that mistake that we know is a mistake. The more time we are there, the more times we have to mentally overcome the challenge of resisting the temptation or physically overcome the challenge, whatever it might be. The more times we have to go through that process, and the more likely it becomes that we fail. Any math people in there, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, you keep rolling the dice, the probability continues to go up. That eventually you're going to roll the wrong number. So this week we're going to be talking about the flood specifically. I said we have 4 different strategies that get revealed over the course of the flood narrative. Last week was the 120 years. That one was rather short. This one is going to be the longest in terms of Scripture. We're actually going to cover chapters 6 through 8, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. But I'm encountering a problem with the text. It's too good, so it was hard to come up with stuff to cut, but I've done my best to try and cut things down so that we can go through the story without just reading the whole thing word for word, and say some things about the story, about what's happening in the story, and those sorts of things. I noticed many of you are already flipping, so you can turn to Genesis chapter 6. That's where we'll be starting today. So I'm going to do my best to try and skip as much as possible and just narrate it without having to actually read it so that we don't get lost just doing the entire sermon reading the story, which, although that would be helpful, is probably not why you all came this morning. So we're picking up right here in where we are in verse chapter 6. We're going to start reading in verse 5. This is right after the Nephilim thing. If you were here last week, you remember that I don't have particularly strong feelings about this. The Nephilim is just a construct in the story to talk about how supernatural the evil was. If we can just leave it at that, that would be really helpful. If you are interested in debating whether they're giants or not at some other time, that's okay. That's not really sermon material, though. So the way that the Nephilim function in the story is they are an exaggerated, over-the-top form of human evil that cannot be contained. It's just huge and massive in scope, not necessarily taking a side here and calling them giants or not, but it is just amazing how big of an influence they have. These Nephilim, these like warrior people or giants or whatever they might be. In the story, they function as an exaggerated form of the results of human evil on the earth. Okay, we can move on. Because if we spend all of our time talking about them, we would really miss something important. The whole point here is what God is doing. So that's a footnote. Let's think about and talk about what God is doing. So we're not even going to read back through that. We're just going to pick up right here in verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. And then we catch a little genealogy here, and we'll skip down in just a moment. But you notice that the human condition on the earth has deteriorated beyond repair. And you might be thinking, wow, that sounds kind of harsh, like God regrets that he created humanity. That sounds like man, that's not how I usually think about God. That's really harsh. But I think revealed in here is something really critical and key that we're going to come back to again at the end of the sermon. In order to address this problem of evil on creation, God had to be honest and realistic about how it was affecting him and how it was making him feel. He had to be honest that he regretted creating people, that the situation got so bad that he was sorry. I think it might be a step too far to say that he repented. But you can see where the story is going here, and you understand. God is not repenting of some evil act that he did, but you're catching that God is sorry that this is how this has gone. So much so that he's going to enact a strategy in order to try and rectify it. Verse 11. Here is his strategy. This is what God is going to do after being honest about how this is affecting him and creation. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood, and make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. And there's more specific instructions given. Skip down to verse 17. For my part, I'm going to bring a flood of waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, and of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every kind shall come in to you to keep them alive. Also take with you every kind of food that is eaten, store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. So God's plan, God's strategy, is to hit the reset button. In a way, quite literally, hit the reset button. God is not going to destroy all of creation and start over with a brand new creation, like we often talk about the flood story being. And in some ways, that's a helpful way to think about it. God is going to destroy almost everything, take some things, and then restart, kind of re-kickstart the whole project. He's not going to throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. He is going to reset creation, not scrap the whole project and start over. And this is important for us, very important for us because we're still here. God didn't decide humans were a bad idea and do something different. We still have humans. That's helpful for us. But also, it's important for us as we get toward the end of the story. God is hitting the reset button on creation. And it's interesting, the method that God is using, water. God is using water to hit the reset button on creation. I'm not going to do anything with that yet. I just want you all to think about that. Why water? Why not fire? Why not some kind of plague? Why not some kind of just, it's done kind of strategy, but water? We'll come back to that. You also notice Noah is the only guy left on the earth who has not completely succumbed to every inclination of his heart. Noah is holding on to Adam's original vocation as a caretaker of creation, and so he is the one who gets chosen, and he and his family, by extension, get chosen in order to do this reset project, this restart, this Kickstarter, if you will. Okay, hanging on to all of these details. Chapter 7 begins with taking 7 pairs of clean animals. Just by quick comment, later when sacrifices happen, don't panic. Those are not animals going extinct. There were extras brought specifically for that purpose. Sometimes people get confused and ask me about that. How did he offer sacrifices? Did those animals go extinct? No, it specifically says there are 7 of the clean animals. Verse 4. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. Then the verses following, they all go into the ark, processional style. Skip down to verse 10. And after 7 days the waters of the flood came on the earth. And in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month of the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Then we get repetition about the procession of animals going on the ark. Skip down to verse 17. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The water swelled and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. The water swelled so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered, and the waters swelled above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, domestic animals, wild animals, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all human beings. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, human beings and animals and creeping things and birds of the air. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those that were with him in the ark. And the water swelled on the earth for 150 days. And it goes for a little while. The mountains, the very tips of the mountains start to appear. Noah starts sending out birds to look for vegetation to see if there's any place that they can walk. A dove finally returns with an olive leaf. We have that actually featured in the back of our sanctuary there, with that beautiful mural. Then God tells Noah to exit the ark. Now it's time. It's safe out there. Chapter 8, verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. Nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. So we've reached the end of the story. So now let's theologize about it. Let's talk about it. Why water? You remember, if you were here last week, in the ancient Near Eastern creation accounts, and in the ancient conception of the world and of the cosmology of the universe, the ocean is the enemy. The primordial ocean, as I called it, the ocean from before time began, the chaos of the primordial ocean, all of these things hopefully ringing the bell from last week, this is the enemy of the order of creation, and by extension, the enemy of humans. God chooses water in order to reset creation because it is fundamentally the act of uncreating. God is willing to take a remnant through the ark and lift them high above the chaos of the waters, floating on the surface. You notice the story was careful to point that out. It floated on the surface. It wasn't a submarine. It was up, right? That's important in the story. God elevates that remnant up, and then everything below it is destroyed. 15 cubits is not very deep, by the way. If anyone was curious, this is a cubit. 15 of these is like the water being 15 cubits above the tips of the mountains is not very high. But the point is that it covered everything. And how did it get there? The waters of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens opened. Day 2 of creation, what does God do? God separates the waters. and calls it sky. What did it look like for the great deep to burst forth and the windows of heaven to open? I don't know, and I don't care, and neither should you. In the story, the sky is being uncreated. The waters from up high are meeting the waters from down low, and the primordial chaos of the ocean is overtaking creation once again. The earth and creation are being uncreated and being enveloped by the primordial chaos. You with me on that? Waters of the great deep, windows of heaven. I don't know how that happened. I don't even care what it looked like. The point is, this is what God did. This is how the reset button gets hit. A remnant gets elevated while the sky gets uncreated. And then a part that we didn't read, God sends a great wind to recede the waters. God created the earth by speaking. A great wind comes. Again, parallels, things we probably shouldn't miss in the story. And the waters begin to recede. The primordial chaos of the ocean takes over the earth and destroys everything. You notice the thoroughness of the strategy. I hope that you caught that as I was reading through. I hope that you caught some of the lines. Chapter 6, verse 7. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air. Verse 13, and God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them, and now I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. 17, everything that is on the earth shall die. It's chapter 7, verse 4. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and nights, and every living thing I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. Verse 22, everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. Did you catch the thoroughness of the strategy? This is completely effective because the chaos of the water is able to get everywhere. But this is not a chaos that is completely out of control, like our other ancient Near Eastern accounts to look back on last week. As if to say, the chaos of the ocean is a goddess that has, for a time, successfully conquered Yahweh and has been allowed to reign on the earth, like many of the other flood stories get narrated. This is a direct decision that God has made. I am going to use this tool, that is the chaos of the waters, that are completely under my jurisdiction and my control, in order to accomplish a purpose for which I have decided the outcome will be. God does it. When God decides it's over, then it's over. Again, standing in stark contrast to other creation accounts that Israel's contemporaries would have probably been propagating. But the strategy is complete. There is nothing left except that which has been saved, that which has been miraculously elevated above the earth. Like a lot of times the question gets asked, how could a boat be that big? And if a boat was that big, how could it have held together? The wood would have twisted and knotted. It was a miracle. Like that, let that be explanation enough. God did a miracle to save these people. And to have 8 people repopulate the earth successfully, also a miracle. Again, let's not get bogged down in the details. This is 100% God acting and doing stuff, and people are just receiving the benefits of God's grace. And the evil of humanity is being wiped out because this is what God decided needed to happen in this moment in time, in this particular way. This is the story. You with me? The situation was so bad, it was not recoverable. No one was able to accurately deduce that except God. That's, again, an important part of the story. This wasn't a human idea. This was God's idea. And as God looks down on the earth and sees that the evil of humanity has spun so far out of control that something has to be done, some direct intervention has to be made. And remember from last week, God has to switch from the micro strategy of talking to individuals to a macro strategy of dealing with humanity proper. God looks and says, I'm going to limit the lifespan of people because they're too good at coming up with ways to hurt each other and me. And then God says, these people are never going to respond to what I'm trying to do. I have to reset, and I have to start over. And this is the second strategy. We're not going to talk about the third and fourth strategies until we get there. This is the second strategy for this week. Sometimes we have to hit the reset button. Sometimes there comes a point in our life where an area of our life is so bungled and so gone, we are not going to be able to recover it. We have to purge it. This is a wildly unpopular message, and I'm pretty okay with that. A lot of bad stuff resulted as a result of the purge, as a result of the flood. Many people died. And I think that that is the reason that people will, in our own lives on a personal level, will decide not to take extreme measures to deal with our sin, to deal with our recurring problems, to deal with the ways that we're hurting our community, our families, etc. We know that the path to eliminating that problem from our life is going to lead through some difficulty and some pain. And so we use that as an excuse to never do it. You notice that God was thorough. God was honest. God was realistic. God realized, I'm not going to be able to recover this people. Every inclination of their heart is evil all the time. Except for Noah, thankfully. I've got this guy. Let's try something here. Now here's where it gets strange. Verse 21 in chapter 8. You remember, the reason that God destroys the earth is because every inclination of the human heart is only evil all the time. Verse 21, the second part. I will never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. That sounds an awful lot like the reason that he destroyed them in the first place. God is realistic. God's example of being realistic about what the needs are is an example to us. God says, I'm not going to destroy humans again. I'm instead going to place barriers between them and the evil that they want to commit. This will make more sense after week 4 when you know all 4 of the barriers, but the first 2 are limited age, and now we have to start over with new humans. And those old habits are going to be gone, and we're going to form new. Every inclination of the human heart is only evil all the time. That's cause for God to take that, rise it above the primordial chaos of the ocean and rescue it, and then start over with it. We'll come back to that in a moment. When this is a little embarrassing, but that's what you do when you're sharing the word and you're preaching. You got to be honest about your experience. Many of you know, or some of you probably don't know, I did not really necessarily grow up a Christian. I was doing my own thing and trying to figure it out, and we kind of orbited the church a little bit, somewhat. But all that is to say, I had a really filthy mouth. It's embarrassing. It was really bad. And it was just kind of in vogue. That was the thing we do. We would use the F word like it was a comma and just constantly, like profanity all over the place. So when I became aware that this was probably not the right thing to be doing, a group of my friends and I, as we kind of got more exposed to the church and I think probably the conviction of the Holy Spirit, like, you shouldn't be talking like that. Not only does it make you sound like an idiot, but it also is bad for you and your community. We got this great idea, and it was really common in those days, this was not our original idea, to take all of our music that had profanity in it and throw it away. This big, grand, sweeping gesture. It was like, we know that putting those words in our ears is making it harder for us to stop them from coming out of our mouths. Let's just take all of that music that has those words in it and throw it away. This big, grand gesture. And that hurt a little bit, because we had spent, allowance money or lawn mowing money or whatever. We had spent some of our money on that, and now we're just going to not see a return for any of that money. All of those things that we bought are going to be gone. And not only that, but we're not going to be able to listen to those songs that we liked. That was kind of, this is kind of a safe example, I think, because it's like, yeah, of course, why wouldn't you go ahead and do that? And parents are thinking, yeah, I could probably see making my children do that if I caught them using the F-bomb like you did when you were a kid. It's kind of reasonable for like a kid to do something that's kind of extreme, because kids, they're in a different world. And so I'm sorry I don't have a better example, but that's the only one I've really experienced with this thing in particular. Well, let me challenge you. Let me just push you a little bit and take that example and push it to the next level. If you have a problem with drinking, you're going to need to cut ties with some relationships. those people, those guys or those gals or whatever that you hang out with that suck you back down into that habit, you're probably going to have to break relationship with them. And that's going to be really painful and hurtful. But you're going to have to be realistic that when you spend time with them, that's what you're going to do. You know the pattern. You've gone there before and you've successfully not drank a couple times. So you're like, oh, it's possible, I can do it as long as my willpower is strong enough. It's not going to work. You're going to keep going back there, and 80% of the time, or 90%, or 99% of the time, you're going to keep falling back into that old pattern. And you have to purge. You have to cut off the stuff that is destroying you in your life. And it's going to hurt, and it's going to be painful. And you might even lose friendships over it, friendships that you've had for an extremely long time. But you're going to have to. You have to be realistic. You got to be realistic that the inclination of your heart is to, get drunk or superimpose your example on it. Gossip with those people, or gamble. You got to quit going to the casino if you got a gambling problem. If you got a language problem, you got to quit filling your head with filth. You got to take a decisive action. You have to be willing to purge. You've got to cut out that stuff that keeps tripping you back up. Every inclination of your heart is to crave that thing and desire that thing. You've got to cut it off. And that's not going to be easy. It's going to be painful and frustrating. Again, I promised to address the movie, the Noah movie that came out not so long ago. Another really powerful moment in that movie is when they're on the ark and they're listening to the death rattles of people drowning. What a powerful metaphor for what it's like to try and purge sin out of our life. Everything in you is going to want to, as Emma Watson's character said, throw ropes out and try and drag them to safety and do anything you can in order to preserve that habit or that problem or whatever. Because you're going to hear it screaming and those relationships are going to be breaking. You're going to feel the pain of loss, and it's going to be hard. But you have to be realistic. You will not break out of that unless you make some changes. And we can learn from God's example and make sweeping changes that are targeted in a particular direction, that are designed to set us free, set the world free like God did, and not trap it. This is the last thing. We'll close with this. I know that some of you, very insightfully so, are sitting there going, yeah, but what about the things that God saved? You're advocating this kind of destroy everything policy. I want to parallel that a little bit with a kind of well, it's not really a metaphor. I just want to parallel that. Oftentimes, your weaknesses are your greatest strengths faced in the wrong direction or emphasized to an incorrect degree. You are going to be able to take something away from that experience that is going to improve you. It's going to make you a better wife or husband or parent or community member or son or daughter. There's going to be something that's going to make you a better minister of the gospel in some way. Even if that only thing is, I overcame that addiction, now I can share that experience with other people. Even if that's all that there is, that's your Noah and his family. That's your ark that floats above the primordial chaos of the ocean. You have something that you will take away from the experience. This will not be all loss. When you purge, you will not immediately be glad that you did that. But you will eventually, and you will have something concrete that you can take away and look back on and say, that was probably the most important thing I've ever done. So I'm going to challenge you. I don't do this often, but I'm going to do it today. I'm going to challenge you. If you're sensing like God might have some kind of purge in mind for you, I want you to come and talk to me, and we're going to pray about it right after church. Or anyone that you trust, any of our leaders here that you trust, or someone else that you trust in the congregation. Pray with Ron, pray with Eric, pray with whoever. But don't let your resolve to do this really difficult thing die with you as you walk out the door. Come find someone, tell them sin can't survive in the light, so I'm telling you this horribly embarrassing thing, and I want to purge it. Will you pray with me, and will you walk through it with me? And whoever you're talking to is going to say yes, and then they're going to pray with you right then on the spot. Let's pray. God, it's such a hard example, and it's such a hard story that you've left us with. Your willingness to deal with sin is never ending, both in the ways that you graciously extend hand out to rescue us from it, and in the ways that you seek to eradicate it. Your justice and your holiness will not tolerate sin forever, and we anxiously await the day when you return, and you put an end to all of this, and we can finally be one with you in community. Oh God, I pray right now for those who might be sensing your leading and your pulling. Like there's something in their life that they need to purge. Something that they need the floods to wash over and clean. I ask that you give them the courage to be able to talk about it, the courage to be able to enact it, the courage to be able to move forward in a difficult direction and make the choice that you're leading them to make. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.